Aloha aina, ano ai, velina kako. Welcome to Free Hawaii News, brought to you by the Koani Foundation, presenting Hawaiian perspectives on a broad range of topics and issues affecting the Hawaiian Islands, the Pacific, and the world. Your hosts for Free Hawaii News are Leon Kaulahau-Siu, musician, composer, diplomat, and political analyst, and Hinaleimoana Wong, Kumu filmmaker, cultural and Hawaiian language preservationist, and community leader. And now, Free Hawaii News.
Ano ai me ke aloha ia kākoa pauloa e ko Hawaii nei pai ai nā puni. Mahalo anui o kou ki kipi ana mai ia māua ma Free Hawaii News o wau no keia o Kumuhina.
Aloha and welcome to this episode of Free Hawaii News.
In a major victory for community members, Hawaiian advocates, and lineal descendants, the Hawaii Department of Health issued a stop work order for a wastewater project in Wainiha on Kauai's North Shore after multiple ancestral burials of Kanaka Maoli were disturbed during construction. The decision came after persistent advocacy from the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, Aina Momona, and the Native Hawaiian Legal Corporation, as well as the local community. The resistance included the arrest of 3 descendants whom attempted to stop further disturbance of iwi Kupuna, the bones of the ancestors unearthed there. As a result, there was a recent meeting on Kauai with the community, iwi protectors from all over Hawaii, as well as decision makers at Waipa'a. One of those attending the meeting was Oahu iwi protector Healani Sonoda Pale, who we have in studio with us today. Aloha e Healani. Please, would you please tell us about the meeting that you attended while you were on Kauai?
Yes, thank you so much for having me here, first of all. So on Monday evening at Waipa'a, which is located in Hanalei, we had a meeting with, it was an unprecedented meeting that was sponsored by the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, and it was with the Department of Health. It was also with Native Hawaiian Legal Corps, and there was a representative from the mayor's office and the county Department of Planning and Permitting. So, and it was attended by about 50 community members, probably more. And it was a really good discussion about the future of the burials that were recently found in Naue. And what spurred this meeting was because of the controversy around these burials. 3 iwi protectors were arrested. They were lineal descendants and from that place of Wainiha and from the North Shore of Kauai, very well-known activist protectors of iwi. And so that was, an excellent meeting. We had a really good discussion. There was still some tension there as well because of the arrest and because of the way that the Department of Health issued the permit to the homeowner. Actually, it's multiple homes. It's a property with, I think, about 3 or 4 homes. And it was to be used for short-term housing rentals and, from what we understand, a yoga retreat. Coconut trees were used as markers for traditional Hawaiian burials, which is burials that are like 50 years or older and are the burial sites of our kupuna, of those that came before us. So what had happened was there was an understanding that no work would be going forward until, and they would come back to the community to then give them a heads up, hey, we're gonna start work now. But that never happened. And they just went ahead. The Department of Health issued the permit after a review by SHPD, and they were able to start digging. And while they were digging, they found iwi kupuna. They actually moved bones around. So they removed, for example, one of the most heartbreaking stories is how they removed a baby off of the chest of what could have been probably the Makua, the parent. and separated them. So there was about 8 or 9 burials that were found in these holes that they had to dig out. And so despite the community saying, please stop, we need to do protocol, there needs to be more investigation, there needs to be a burial plan, we need to have a say. The families came forward. It was heartbreaking. And instead of stopping the work, they called the cops on the protectors who one of them actually went into the hole to protect the bones from being dug up, and he was carried out. Another protector, so the first one that was in the hole was Kona Wong, and his sister, Megan Wong, was jumped by 4 police officers and arrested. And then Paula Chandler was also arrested as well. 2 of the arrestees, the brother and sister, had to go and admit themselves into the ER after being released from police custody. So that was really, they were really bust up. I mean, scratched up, the clothes ripped, and things like that. So it escalated to that point. And so what this meeting was on Monday was basically, okay, wait, how are we gonna move forward now? So OHA stepped in, which was amazing. Aina Momona stepped in. Native Hawaiian Legal Corps stepped in. OHA was able to stop to get the Department of Health to pull the permit, and to basically say, okay, wait, hold up, no more work. We can't do any more work until we figure out what's happening, right? Why did it get to this point where 3 people were arrested, 3 Kanaka, and 2 of them were admitted to the hospital? Who made these decisions? And to this day, I think we still don't know how it's going to be moved forward, how we're going to move forward on this issue, but at least at this point, they're going to look at it more closely on what to do next. And what they did find, and what a big part of the discussion on Monday night, was that there's a lot of holes. There's a lot of, things that aren't covered by the burial laws and processes. There were EV protectors from all over Hawaii that flew in for that meeting.
Mm-hmm. I'm really surprised because it is customary whenever doing things within the current framework of state law, and of course we know how some of us will feel about state law. But in this case, what should have been triggered was the fact that if you remove a former cesspool, or you're installing something new, you still have to have, at minimal, a monitoring plan in place. And really, the onus would fall upon the burial site specialist of the island to ensure that this was carried forth. I'm wondering, what did the burial site specialist say at the meeting?
Well, the burial site specialist, there's only one in Kauai, did not show at the meeting. And actually, there was a cultural monitor on site. I know his first name is Milton, and he's basically the only cultural monitor on the island. And they have video of him not paying attention when they were digging. And the way that they were digging was like, it was almost intentionally like trying not to find anything, but as they dug, you could see on the side that there were bones, and then now there's just open gaping holes. And one of the protectors actually found part of a skull just sitting on a pile of sand just last week, because there's no work. So there's a lot of work to be done on that site. I mean, they need to sift through that sand to find the iwi kupuna.
Yes.
And then you can see the bones on the side of the holes. And these are not just bones. I mean, there are our ohana, they're our family. It is very clear that the community, no matter what background they're from, the neighbors, the store owners, the just, Hawaiian and non-Hawaiian alike are all in support of protecting those burials. This is really an issue that has the community's support. Once people see how, like, this is really inhumane, like it's a human rights issue, really. It's about your humanity and being able to know that your ancestors are able to rest in peace, right? So I'm an EV protector here on this island, and we've seen that happen for us too, where the community is just very supportive, and the landowner who we were fighting with at first turned around. So EV Kupuna is one of those issues that is really a special sacred kind of mission, when you protect it, because you really gotta, it's really about everybody's humanity.
There's no excuse in 2024 as to why this should be playing out in the manner that it has.
Yeah.
It's understood that shoreline areas, high propensity for EV. It's understood that sandy loams and that kind of context of soil is going to yield your EV Kupuna finds. When you talk about EV Kupuna, the whole reason why archaeological inventory surveys, according to law, must be done properly and must be done thoroughly is to ensure that if there are EV Kupuna found there, that it enables the community to weigh in. I think that it's thanks to your vigilance, and it's thanks to the protectors on Kauai who were there on the front line.
Yeah.
It's thanks to everybody who came forward, as well as the Office of Hawaiian Affairs and Aina Momona, as well as the Native Hawaiian Legal Corporation. Mahalo to all of you for your vigilance in protecting EV. As we stated, when the EV Kupuna were unearthed in Wainiha, 3 descendants to those burials were arrested for attempting to protect the bones of their ancestors from further desecration. We go now to Kauai, where Megan Wong, one of those descendants who was arrested, is standing by. Aloha mai, Megan.
Aloha, Hina. I'm so honored to be here with you today.
Megan, when did you first learn that the burials of these ancestors had been disturbed?
Back in June, I believe. It's a little confusing to what the date was exactly right now. I was working nearby. I knew that there was a project going on, and I wanted to introduce myself to the cultural monitor on site. So I walked over on a Tuesday and introduced myself. Machines had already been operating, maybe for an hour or so. When I walked over, I felt the energy was a little tense, and everyone had stopped and were kind of solemn. So I had asked them, like, were EV Kupuna already found? And they said yes, about 10 minutes ago.
What was your reaction, and what actions did you take?
At that point, I went over with whomever was there, including their cultural monitor, the steps that needed to be taken, which was to call KPD, make a police report, and wait for SHPD to come and make their assessment. I also went over the protocols of protecting and respecting EV Kupuna under the protocols that we've learned from Hale Aloha IU. So I took about maybe 15 minutes or so explaining some of that, explaining some of our reverence and the way we show respect in front of those EV Kupuna, and that all work should stop.
The remains are of 2 Kanaka maoli, or our Hawaiian burials, 1 adult and 1 child, yes?
Yes, for clarification on that, the first burial that had been hit within 15 minutes of my arrival was determined to be an adult with a child laying on top of the adult. Now, I left the scene and I found out later that evening that they had moved about 20 feet across and continued to dig the second septic tank hole. In that, they disturbed 1 EV Kupuna resting in the wall, and then they found 2 more resting in place. So they called that 1 inadvertent and 2 resting in place.
The context that the burials are found in was that a septic tank buried in the ground right next to the EV, they were contaminated, they were impacted by sewage leaking from the septic tank. Is this correct?
So for clarification, this is a cesspool conversion. So there were 4 cesspools that are being converted to septic. This is a vacation rental compound with 5 vacation rentals. They did not have a shoreline assessment done. They had some weaseling ways around that. Because of that, their Department of Health didn't really have an assessment to where the tanks should be set. So they should be a 50-foot setback from the highest water wash, but they haven't done that assessment in so many decades, so they don't actually know where that is. We document those shoreline high water washes, so we personally know where those are, and those documentations have been happening for the last 30 years. So that's been very clear. So these are new tanks. At that time in June, those tanks, we'll call that septic tank 1, and that's where the child is resting on top of the adult. Septic tank hole 2, where 3 inadvertents are found, or 1 inadvertent and 2 resting in place are found. Now, all work stopped the next day because my brother and I came back and stopped the machine operators and said, this can't happen this way. And this was after state historic preservation departments, archaeologists had observed the scene and left them to continue work. So all work stopped. We met with the landowner maybe about a month later. His name is Chris. We spent about 3 or so hours with him explaining our culture and the significance and the reverence we give to our iwi kupuna, regardless of their ethnicity and where they come from. And he said he wanted to do the right thing. So at that point, all was at a rest. We had asked him to do ground penetrating radar because we felt it was important to not have any more inadvertent. He agreed to that. And one company came out while we were there, and that company had a little metal tool, and they walked around the property without the ground penetrating radar and said that this place is a graveyard. The entire space shows anomalies and it's a graveyard. They ended up not hiring that company, but another company, and we asked to be part of that process so we could see what anomalies look like. They didn't have us on site when that was done. When we came back, there are multiple flags showing anomalies, but calling them utility lines. They were clearly not utility lines because they said they were including us in the process on September. Everything sat until September 22nd when I texted the owner and I said, we really need to rest these iwi kupuna and bury them. And there was supposedly they were going to talk about a redesign of the system since we have iwi kupuna in the holes of the septic tanks. He assured me on the 22nd of September that we would be included and that they would let us know, and they would not be closing the hole or doing anything. They wanted us to be do the ceremony and do all the protocols involved. About 3 or 4 days later, we find out that the machines had been on property. They installed both septic tank 1 and 2 and cemented them in. They used a plyboard that they called a buffer. There was roughly about 3 feet between the new septic tank and the iwi kupuna resting in place. Because they ignored the flags that were found to be anomalies in the surrounding area of tank number 2, while digging, they changed the angle of the tank, and so they dug where that anomaly was, and what a surprise, another body fell out. Then because of the machine work and the wall gave way and 2 more bodies fell out. So now in tank number 2, there's a total of 6 bodies that have fallen out of that hole. They went ahead and gathered up the pieces, so I'm told, and put them back on the wall, put the tank in, put a plyboard in between, cemented the tank and the plyboard in, dumped some dirt over the top of it, and called it a day. They continued to go ahead and dig a leach field. This is leach field that goes to tank number 2. So this is leach field number 2 in the driveway. While they were digging, they found parts of a baby and another adult. They took those parts of the body and they added them to tank number 2 with the graves of 6 others. That leach field, when we came upon the scene, was open, and that's where we started occupying the driveway and property for about 3 weeks, playing cat and mouse with the machine operator so they wouldn't come back on and do any more digging. In the meantime, we continued to reach out to State Hawaii Preservation Department, Department of OHA, which is Office of Hawaiian Affairs, our county, every entity that we could think of that could make a difference. And we just occupied and waited.
How important is it to you and your ohana that the bones of your ancestors be protected and respected?
We ask that our iwi kupuna be respected. We don't know if these iwi kupuna are our kupuna by blood, but even so, we hanai them and make them part of our ohana. What we do know is that our kupuna lived in the time of their death. So they may be related, they may not be. But our village of Wainiha and Haena and Halalea, our North Shore here, still today, with all the changes, are still very much connected. We know most everyone here. When a new face comes into town, we'll know it. So I believe that that's probably what it was like back 200 years ago, 400 years ago, whenever these bones are dated to be. And so it's highly likely that my personal kupuna, if not related, knew these kupuna that were in their village here. And we believe that all iwi kupuna matter, and that it doesn't matter if they were Japanese, Portuguese, Filipino, they're humans and they were resting in place, and this is their resting place. As I explained to others, is that as we see here, they're buried like in clusters. And there was probably their dying wish to be buried together as a family, as we see today in our own families that want to be buried together. So if we were to say, these iwi kupuna are in our way, so let's move them to another spot on the property. That doesn't feel right, because we feel most likely their ohana is buried right next to them. How would you like to be moved away from your ohana or separated in death after your resting place? The other thing we need to think about is most of them are resting in a position, and most of them are facing east. They're in a fetal position. Some are in a sit upright position. Some are being cradled by another loved one, possibly. But once we pick apart their bodies and move them out of our way because we think a septic tank needs to go in their grave, there's no way we can put them back together. So I guess that makes me emotional as I look at those bodies in the wall and I think about picking apart that child's body and moving them. that doesn't seem right. That doesn't seem respectful in any culture.
Megan, how would you answer non-Hawaiians who ask why your ancestors' bones are not moved and reburied in a conventional cemetery?
I would say if you come from whatever culture, religion, ethnicity, how would you feel if we went into your graveyard and took apart your grandmother, your mother, your child, and said, we decided that we want to live in this graveyard, and they're kind of in our way today. We bought this property, so we're going to move them to another graveyard. Just because our graveyards are not marked, it doesn't mean this is not a graveyard.
What will happen to these iwi? Will they be reburied there or in a different location?
These particular iwi kupuna have been determined to rest in place. We had asked for the tank removals, and we are asking for a redesign of the system. That iwi kupuna were there first. So we need to work around those who were there before us, not the other way around. There are many options to have a septic in place, and it doesn't need to take the home and the resting place of iwi kupuna. So these iwi kupuna are resting in place, and our issue is that they should not have to rest in place with septic tanks. And you need to ask yourself the question, would that be okay if that were your ohana? Because it wouldn't be okay if it were mine.
In your view, what needs to happen or change to reduce and hopefully eliminate from this happening in the future?
There needs to be better practice. And I think the biggest change that needs to happen is contact with the lineal or cultural descendants. There are 8 known cultural descendants of this area. A cultural descendant may not know who those iwi kupuna are to say that is my ohana and I know them by name. But like I said, we were all come from this area, and most likely our kupuna also knew whomever is resting in this grave. So that is a cultural descendant. The cultural descendants are supposed to be notified from Burial Council or State Historic Preservation Department. That has not been done. That was something that we had called out and asked for. Some of those descendants had reached out to SHPD, asking them why they had not been reached out to. There was no response. As of today, I have sent in my descendancy and I'm awaiting recognition. I believe that the voice needs to come from the people of this place and this area that have to speak for those who have passed. And so that practice needs to be enforced, and we need to be included in that. The time needs to be taken to allow the families to come together to maybe view all options. And maybe some families would come together and say, maybe we need to move them. Maybe other families will come together and say, you move the septic, you don't move our iwi kupuna, because like in this case, they're buried all together. So you would separate a family, or you would start to move some and more bodies would start falling out of the wall. There is a stop work order from the county, and that's specifically to any work on the homes themselves and any further septic work. There was no work activity since we met with all of the agencies who had promised to do sifting thoroughly on the project first.
Ano leila, mahalo nui a oe Megan, mahalo nui ko ho'o kupa'a, mahalo nui ko ho'o ikaika. Mahalo ka awa mokuleana. Mahalo.
We now come to our segment called The Pacific Way. This is where we talk about our opinions and our thoughts about where we're going with our involvement within the Pacific, and about how we think about our issues and our challenges and things like that from a Pacific perspective. Yeah, so
Absolutely.
Yeah, one of the things that we talked about last time had to do with the movement going on in the Pacific about a zone of peace, or actually they're calling it Ocean of Peace. And this is something we definitely want to join the Pacific nations, the rest of the Pacific Islands with, to join them in advocating for that. And this brought to mind about how we are often left out of many of the discussions and the movements that are going on in the Pacific. So we thought we'd talk a little bit more about how we need to engage and be part of the discussion, be part of the planning and the implementation of how we can work as a Pacific nation, Pacific area. Pacific Islands Forum sort of fills that for the rest of the Pacific, but we've been left out of it. So we need to re-engage with that. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely, yes. And I think that the fact that Hawaii is politically dominated and controlled by the United States of America, it has for too long precluded us from actively participating as we rightfully should in the Pacific. Our South Pacific cousins and friends and family have consistently met over how many years now? And you are correct. Hawaii has been excluded until recently, where efforts to acknowledge us in an honorary position at the table have been put forward. And it's now up to us to actually join you, because you've been doing this for so long. And we appreciate your vigilance. We acknowledge that you have long been going to the South Pacific in addition to going to Geneva. And you've been absolutely vigilant about keeping our connection, and I fully support this. I think that it is the rightful way to go, and it is about time that our own Kanaka not only recognize, if they don't, but they need to be cognizant of the fact that we are rightfully Pacific Island people. The dominance of the identity of being America has completely pushed out our sense of duty and our sense of obligation to ourselves, not as Americans, but as Pacific Islanders. And not just as Pacific Islanders, but as Kanaka of Hawaii, whom are genealogically connected to the plethora of islands, the hundreds of islands that include Tonga, Samoa, Tahiti, Tokelau, Tuvalu, Uvea, Futuna, Niue, Niua, Aotearoa, Rapa Nui, and the list goes on. These are islands that belong to our family. We have genealogical ties. We share the same culture. When I say culture, I'm not talking about how culture has changed over time and space, but the core elements of culture and our key words for food, our key words for land, our key words for so many different things that are basic to our Pacific life. We share these terms, and our people are not consciously aware of this.
Yes, yes. And what is really interesting is that when you talk about the influences of the Western world on our islands, that has actually been prevalent all throughout Oceania. But our cousins to the south and those to the north and west of us, they actually have been dealing with this in that they are using their own culture to not to push back, but to reassert who they are. And this is really great. Now, one of the things that I think that where Hawaii did contribute greatly was in the voyaging, the Hokulea, and that entire impact on voyaging, which reawakened the entire Pacific to our mutual voyaging legacy and our traditions. But it had died out everywhere else as well as here. So with Hokulea revitalizing that, it's brought us even closer together. So in some way, we had a part in helping to bring that back together. Yes. And now we're looking at everything else. We really need to revitalize our nation here in Hawaii, but also to be part of that whole Pacific revitalization that's going on.
Yes, and part of this Pacific revitalization requires absolute vigilance and awareness on our part to emphasize our place in the Pacific. And there are so many different ways for us to be able to expand this. Our people are not involved when it comes to the South Pacific sports games. And we have our own our own athletes and we have our own sports players that really could and should be playing with our own cousins. But we don't play in the same sandbox as everybody else. And everything is so attuned to going to the continental US that many of our people, with which this is one of my greatest laments, that our people don't even realize how rich the interaction is. And of course, you know, in the Festival of Pacific Arts that came to us several months ago, we saw a great rekindling yet again of our relationships to the greater Pacific.
Yes. It was also a reminder of how estranged we are from the rest of the Pacific. But again, the possibilities, I believe, have opened up. The optimism, I think, is back.
Yes.
We see what we're missing, and we see how we can contribute.
Yes.
Yeah, so this is a wonderful thing. I think we're in the process of re-engaging on all levels.
Yes.
It's been called a landmark victory for peace. Since 1964, the U.S. Army has leased 780 acres of Makua Valley on Oahu's west side for live fire training, for which it pays the state the grand sum of only $1. Because of Hawaiian protests, there have been no actual live fire at Makua for 20 years, but the U.S. Army only recently formally and permanently ended their live fire trainings. The announcement is a landmark, hard-fought victory for Malama Makua, a Hawaiian-led community advocacy organization that sued the U.S. Army 25 years ago to end its destructive practices. To celebrate the significant achievement, a 3-day public celebration was held last month inside Makua Valley, marking 20 years of no live fire trainings. Many of those who have been advocates over the years to stop live fire trainings attended. One of those is local activist Emilia Kandagawa, who joins us today here in the studio to tell us about it. Aloha, Emilia.
Aloha.
Good to have you here.
Good to be here. Thank you
Yes.
for inviting us.
Well, we're really interested in this, and congratulations on this great victory. And we're heading in the direction. So tell us about this 3-day celebration. How was it?
It was beautiful. There was three long days, but 3 really good days. We had a slightly different program for each day, but we wanted to kind of make as much room for as many people as possible throughout that time. So our first day on Friday, last week Friday, was geared towards students, high school and early college age students in the valley. And then the second day was when we had the Royal Order come in, and they did opening protocols for us and laid the foundation for basically a pu'uhonua of Makua now. And Sunday was was another kind of it was a closing, but had a little bit different speakers throughout the day. Makua obviously is the word for parent, and so in terms of the like origin stories and the Kumulipo, like that, Makua as the site, as the birthplace really of like of Haloa, and that as a
Of the
Makua
Hawaiian
as one of
people.
yes,
we
and so
came from there. So at one time, Makua Valley was a thriving, populated place, a large population
Correct.
of native peoples.
Correct.
Yeah.
yes.
So, and then they were displaced by the military. What year was that?
It really officially began the military use, specific military use and occupation of Makua Valley after the bombing of Pearl Harbor.
So
And
at that point, did they then evacuate everybody from the valley?
Yes, and there's stories of at least one family who was removed at gunpoint.
The bombing proceeded during World War II, and it continued for years after that, or the live fire
Correct.
exercises.
Correct.
Now, so what kind of damage do you find has been done to the valley?
So, I mean, this is, of course, like there's ebbs and flows throughout the decades, but really there's thousands and thousands, if not maybe 1 million at this point, of bombs that have been dropped over the course of this, of 80 years now. And the damage is tremendous, because even I believe even just in that most recent 10-year period since since bombing, what year is that? 2004. That 10 years prior to that, I believe the military has documented 270 fires that have taken over the valley in different places. 270 fires just in a 10-year. Fires that have started just from the live fire training. Through the EPA, they had applied for permitting basically to be able to explode old bombs and also dispose of medical waste. And so there's the amount of chemicals that have been exploded and seeped into the soil, seeped into the water table, the amount of unexploded bombs that are offshore, under the ocean. Like there's just tremendous damage that has been done. And even from, just the fires alone that have been started from, as a result of live fire training has burnt native forest, has brought multiple species, endemic species, to the brink of extinction.
Now that we're seeing that live fire has stopped, what's happening now? Is Makua going to be returned? And if so, can he be rehabilitated?
So there's a lot of uncertainty still yet. The Army lease, among many other Army leases that were 65-year leases, the 65-year leases for $1, which there's no receipt even for the receipt of that $1 that was supposedly paid. But those, for Makua specifically, it's a little bit tricky and uncertain, because, in the original lawsuit, the stipulation was that in 2001, when the Army did go back and begin live fire training again as a result of the 9/11 attacks, there was another lawsuit that was filed at that time, where the stipulation was that once the lease is up, there's the expectation that the Army is going to do an environmental assessment. They're going to put the valley back in the original state that they found it, which of course is a large expense, but there is a loophole basically where they can, if they decide that they don't want to do that for one reason or the other, they have the option to do an appraisal of the real estate value of the land. The goal is really simple: to go back.
This is a great step, and it's a wonderful opportunity to set an example of refurbishing, recovering, and renewing the land.
Yeah.
So mahalo for you coming to share. Last month, I talked about the historic precedent set by the United Kingdom's return of the Chagos Islands to the Republic of Mauritius, an African island nation in the Indian Ocean. The return of the Chagos Islands was the result of an advisory opinion issued by the world's highest court, the International Court of Justice, to which the UK complied, thus settling a 50-year-long territorial dispute. This month, that same International Court of Justice, the one that ruled on the Chagos Islands case, will begin to hear oral testimony on a climate change case that was initiated by the Republic of Vanuatu, a Pacific Island nation. Only this time, the case involves virtually the entire world. On March 29, 2023, the United Nations General Assembly adopted a resolution by consensus. That means it was so widely supported, the UN did not have to take an actual roll call vote. The resolution was a request from the UN General Assembly to the International Court of Justice for an advisory opinion on the obligations of states with respect to climate change. At the UN, countries or nations are called states. The little Pacific Island state, the Republic of Vanuatu, spearheaded this initiative in a 2021 announcement that was supported by grassroots youth organizations. Vanuatu published the first draft of the resolution in late 2022. The draft was then altered through a series of consultations with UN delegates in the following months, and the initiative gained traction. On March 1, 2023, Vanuatu announced it had amassed overwhelming support for the draft resolution with 105 co-sponsor states. It was submitted to the UN General Assembly and, as stated earlier, adopted by consensus rather than a roll call vote. The advisory opinion being requested represents an opportunity to clarify the legal obligations of states or countries with respect to climate change. For Vanuatu and supporters of the resolution, this is also a chance to spur transformative climate action to advance climate justice and to protect the environment for present and future generations. Part of the discussion on the need for an advisory opinion on climate change focuses on the possibility to interpret the obligations in the Paris Agreement and the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. The request also references international human rights. The human rights implications of climate change were central to Vanuatu's campaign, particularly because Vanuatu, like other small island developing states, is one of the most climate vulnerable countries in the world. Several courts, especially in Europe, have recently considered the human rights implications of climate change in various cases. Each of these cases sought to enhance accountability and climate ambition through recognition of the human rights dimensions of climate change. These cases and the links between human rights and climate change identified by domestic courts will likely be leveraged in the ICJ's analysis of the legal questions posed. The process of requesting an advisory opinion from the ICJ is quite unique. Rather than submitting a straightforward request directly to the court, Vanuatu engaged in a year-long campaign to build strong support within the UN General Assembly. The General Assembly adopted the resolution after more than 12 months of worldwide consultations. This participatory process included formal consultations with a wide range of UN member states, as well as the active engagement of more than 1,500 civil society and youth groups across 130 countries. After this unprecedented amount of groundwork by Vanuatu and its supporters, on March 29, 2023, Vanuatu and supporting states put the resolution to a vote. The result was the UN General Assembly formally and eagerly adopted the resolution by consensus. The ICJ has discretionary power to decline or to give an advisory opinion, even if the conditions of jurisdiction are met. However, considering its role as a principal judicial organ of the UN, the International Criminal Court must give careful consideration as to whether there are compelling reasons to decline to respond to a UN request. It is worth noting that the ICJ, the International Criminal Court, has never, in the exercise of this power, declined to respond to a request for an advisory opinion from the UN General Assembly. Also, the ICJ has the authority to interpret and even reformulate the question presented to it. The good news is that the ICJ accepted the case and just began hearing testimonies this month. Over 100 states and organizations had submitted requests to testify, twice as many as any previous case, so the hearings will take at least a month to conclude. After the oral hearings, the ICJ could take several months to deliberate, so we won't know their decision until sometime in the first half of 2025. Even though the ICJ advisory opinions have no binding force, they do carry legal weight and moral authority. Furthermore, the strength of the advisory opinion's legal arguments, among other factors, carry great weight. We are very optimistic about the outcome. We wish to congratulate Ambassador Odo Tevi, the permanent representative of the Vanuatu mission to the United Nations in New York, and his staff of 3 people for being the driving force behind this momentous initiative with the potential to produce planet-changing effects to benefit and safeguard generations to come. And while we're at it, congratulations to the late Tony DeBroom, the foreign minister of the Marshall Islands, who put climate change on the world stage by convening the first climate change conference, the COP. The most recent COP29 just concluded in Baku, Azerbaijan. Despite its many shortcomings, the UN still provides a platform from which small countries can do great things. Things that can refocus priorities to change the world for the good of all, and possibly save the planet.
Eia mai no kākou I keia hapa o keia polokalamu nei, oia ho'i o Kumu Hinaʻs mana'o. This is where I get to share with you my thoughts and my sentiments about different topics and issues. And today I'd like to speak to you for a moment about iwi kupuna that we are hearing about elsewhere in this program tonight. I spent 13 years in service on the Burial Council for the island of Oahu, and I learned many things during my time of service. I learned that Hawaii has some of the strongest laws in existence when it comes to malama iwi kupuna, and I learned that the laws can be very effective and can be very efficient. They were quite well thought out because they had Kanaka that were participatory in formulating these laws. The real problem comes in the opinions, the legal opinions about how to and when to not only deploy the law, but to, for example, ensure that it is executed in a manner that's consistent with the highest level of iwi kupuna protection, as well as advocacy for descendants whom come forward. In our islands, the burial laws that came about in the late 80s as a result of the egregious iwi kupuna situation that arose at Honokahua on the island of Maui. This gave way to burial laws that were intended to afford the highest level of protection to iwi kupuna. And the State Historic Preservation Division is a division underneath the Department of Land and Natural Resources that is responsible for overseeing the burial sites program. The burial site specialist, whom is a member of the staff that is overseen by the Culture and History Branch Chief of the State Historic Preservation Division. It's important to know that out of the 3 branches under State Historic Preservation, they include Culture and History, they include Architecture, they also include Archaeology. But when it comes to the Culture and History, that is the branch that houses the burial site specialists. These individuals on each island are responsible for the following duties. It is their duty to receive communication and emails or mails that people might make effort to make in communication with the Burial Council. They are to prepare the minutes and record the proceedings of each meeting, and they are also expected to schedule the public announcement that is alerting the community to the upcoming meeting. Their job is also to ensure that whatever support the Burial Council needs to meet is provided. Now, this is where it is sometimes not too clear. On the island of Oahu, where we were quite exercised and remain exercised in executing the burial laws and following them and honoring them, this process is a well thought out process, and if the main focus on both sides, State Historic Preservation Division and the Burial Council, if both are focused primarily on proper respect, honor, dignity, and proper care and treatment of the burials, if they are the primary focus, then everybody will likely be in alignment with one another. It's when other people focus on other things and they have other agendas that there comes discrepancy and other issues. So I am going to leave this there for you. There's so much more, and I think I'm going to talk more about this in Kumu Hina's Mana'o. But once again, the current state laws that oversee and are meant to protect burials actually work. But people have to know how to deploy them, people have to know how to make them work, and people have to know role and responsibility. And you've heard Kumu Hina talk about this, kulana and kulena. You must know the role that you serve, and you must know the responsibilities that come with that role. And if everyone were to take care and to think about role and responsibility, especially when it comes to Malama Iwi Kupuna, we would not be having segments that speak about Iwi Kupuna issues. And that is food for thought from Kumu Hina's Mana'o for you all tonight.
Mahalo nui for joining us for this episode of Free Hawaii News. We want to thank all of our guests for being here and for the mana'o that they shared.
Ano leila mahalo anu ia oko e ka lehu o ka pai aino Hawaii nei. Mahalo anu i ke kipa ana mai o ka oko ho'one nea mai ke iahiahi nei. Mahalo ke hui ana hui ho. Aloha.
We hope you enjoyed this month's episode of Free Hawaii News. Mahalo for watching. There's a new show every month, so this program will air several more times this month. You can view it anytime on Olelo's on-demand site or on YouTube. See you next time. Ahui ho, aloha aina.
The Free Hawaii Broadcasting Network.